Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Welcome into another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. It's Monday, December 14th. Hopefully you guys had a fantastic weekend out there. Here in the greater Philadelphia area, the weather was excellent, creeping up towards the high 50s, able to get outside, enjoy ourselves one last time here, it seems, because Jack Frost in winter is coming right around the corner. For the first time this season, it looks like we're going to get about a foot of snow around these parts. So I know in the Northeast, Boston, kind of the New England area, they've gotten a bit of snow the past couple of storms, but we were lucky around here that it was still warm enough. It was rain, but not anymore. So about a foot of snow, that should stick around for Christmas, make it a white Christmas, and who's going to argue with that? I mean, certainly not myself. But wherever you're at listening to this, hopefully you guys had a fantastic weekend, getting your holiday shopping going here, since we are less than 2 weeks away from the big day. Or if you're in the Hanukkah season, I know that has just begun. So whatever you're celebrating out there, hopefully your holiday season's off to a fantastic start. And I appreciate you guys listening in. But today's episode's going to have a bit of a National League East flavor to it. Dave Dombrowski was hired by the Phillies. The Mets made a hire of Jared Porter at general manager. We're going to talk about the Rule 5 draft and then get into an update on the minor league system here today. So we got a great show for you. Let's jump right into it here, right up the top of the show. This is the first time I'm really going to be speaking about my Philadelphia Phillies here in great detail. And yes, of course, I'm a fan of the Phillies, but want to remain professional during all of this and discuss what exactly is taking place here. But the Phillies have hired Dave Dombrowski as president of baseball operations. And this became a bit of a surprising hire, just due to the fact that Dombrowski's name came up right when the position initially became available, but he had communicated that he wasn't interested, and he was kind of looking into MLB expansion and what is taking place there. Well, over the course of the past couple of weeks, the Phillies, Thad Levine's name's been involved. They've had Michael Hill involved, and over the past couple of weeks, apparently the commissioner's office reached out to Dombrowski and told them that the timeline on expansion has been pushed back a handful of years because of the coronavirus, other economic issues going on. They want to make sure everything kind of stabilizes before they go into expanding into a new team. And I think these conversations manifested themselves because of Theo Epstein out in Chicago stepping down. I think one of the only ways to get him back into the game this upcoming season was to work in Nashville with Dombrowski on that expansion team. But if that team's not coming to fruition over the next couple of years, Dombrowski now found himself back in the job market because, he didn't want to be sitting in quote-unquote retirement for the next couple of seasons. So John Middleton of the Phillies called him up. Apparently over the course of 48 hours, a deal was discussed and more or less agreed to. And now Dombrowski is taking over the Phils. And what does this mean? Are they going to hire a GM under Dave Dombrowski? For this upcoming season, everybody's reporting and all the conversation is no, he is going to take that title. But as a president of baseball operations, you can have a general manager underneath you. So will they be keeping current acting GM Ned Rice in a similar role under Dombrowski? That is yet to be determined. But ultimately, Middleton, during his press conference, came out and discussed about how now they have two very experienced, very well-respected leaders at key positions within the organization, Dombrowski being one, and the hire last year of Joe Girardi as manager being the other. So he feels that those two will be able to get on the same page, steady the ship, and point it in the correct direction moving forward. But what do we know about Dombrowski? Let me get into it here before I kind of get into his upcoming obligations for the Phillies. But Dombrowski's career, he actually started out with the Montreal Expos. He was in the front office as a player development rep and worked his way all the way up to general manager of the Expos. He then went to work for the Florida Marlins, where he won a title in 1997. In his 5th season with the team, he then dismantled everybody on the team. Everybody remembers the teardown and the fallout after that. But he was also involved with building the team back up. He did leave Florida for Detroit in 2002, but after he left, the Marlins won the title again in 2003, and a lot of players involved with that team were because of Dave Dombrowski's moves a handful of years earlier. So he leaves Florida to go to Detroit, in which his second year they only won 43 games. He then, over the course of the next decade with Detroit, went to 2 World Series appearances, 2 more American League Championship Series. Things did start to decline throughout his tenure there, very similar to what happened to the Phillies in 07 through 11, losing an ALCS, losing a World Series, losing an ALCS, and then losing the ALDS in that time there. So was never able to get over the hump and win a World Series in Detroit, but certainly put together a fantastic 4-year run before ultimately he was released from his duties in Detroit. He was then brought on with the Red Sox. This was his most recent stop. He was there for 5+ years. He himself, he took them to the playoffs, losing back-to-back years in the ALDS before winning the World Series in 2018, but then subsequently being fired less than a year later in 2019. And you think to yourself, man, it's got to be difficult to be let go from a position less than a year after winning a World Series for that team. And a lot of this had to do with the contracts and the way the team was set up for future success. So Dombrowski's MO, or kind of the mold that he comes from, is he does trade. He's very aggressive in trades. He typically gives up prospects in return for big league ready talent. One of the jokes locally in the media is basically every one of the top prospects, they're telling them to start packing their bags and not renewing the lease on their apartments, because more often than not, he's shipping out prospects for major league level ready talent at this current time. So it'll be interesting to see his maneuvers in Philadelphia, but he's made a number of fantastic trades in his past. So when it comes to trading, of course, there's some bad. There's more good than bad, but the contract situation is one that typically comes up when you're discussing Dave Dombrowski. And in particular, 3 or 4 examples. The most recent was Mookie Betts not being able to sign him to a long-term deal because you have Nate Eovaldi for 4 years and $68 million. You have David Price for 7 years, $217 million. You have J.D. Martinez paid, so you can't pay or allocate the correct resources to the right players, and that put them in the situation where they're currently in, where 2019 was a down year, 2020 was not good for Boston, and 2021 certainly still seems like a rebuilding year. But if you're a fan base, would you take a World Series title for 3 to 5 years of a rebuild? I think maybe not in Boston, just because they're accustomed to a certain level of consistent success. But here in Philadelphia, the last title we got was 12 going on 13 years ago now, and that certainly bought guys 3 to 5 years, and Ruben Amaro Jr. But if he's able to kind of wheel and deal and bring a title back to Philly, and we go through another rut like this, I'm sure he will be remembered positively within the city. But his last deal here to discuss that is always brought up is the Miguel Cabrera extension. 8 years, $248 million. He's still on the books for another couple of years through his age 40 season. Well, that was the two sides of the coin, because Dombrowski traded for Cabrera in his prime in Detroit, brought him in. He's one of the reasons they made it to 2 World Series, multiple playoffs, Triple Crown winner. But then he also gives him the extension, which here in Philly, everybody thinks, oh, we know that. That's called Ryan Howard. You don't pay them while they're coming up for their production, so you pay them for past production in future seasons, and ultimately they, quote-unquote, do not live up to the current contract. So, Dombrowski, his resume certainly speaks for itself. They're very positive with bringing him in. It certainly seems like this was the Phillies' ideal candidate from the start. They went heavy after Dombrowski. He ultimately told them no because he was still interested in the expansion team, but circumstances since then have changed. The Phillies were not able to get a few other top candidates that they had their mindset on, and ultimately come back to Dombrowski to bring him on board here moving forward. So is he going to be able to jive or connect with the analytics style of baseball that continues to be more progressive? And, he said all the right things during his press conference. He likes to combine scouting and analytics. He knows people on both sides of the pendulum, but he likes to combine them. He knows that the Phillies are, quote-unquote, retooling and not rebuilding. He spoke about Aaron Nola, Zach Wheeler, Bryce Harper, all the guys under contract who are above average big league guys, saying there's too much talent on this team to completely rebuild. But they do need changes here to be more competitive, specifically with the bullpen. That was discussed, and I do think that him and the Driveline contingent, and Driveline is a style of program or company based on throwing metrics and workouts for your arm, and those guys are very much involved with computers, analytics, weight, sabermetrics, kind of 3D models, things like that. So is Dombrowski, who's a bit more on the older side of things, certainly not a quote-unquote up-and-comer, is he going to be able to relate and interpret that data and be able to communicate that amongst the scouting team, amongst the coaching staff, to implement a process that ultimately can make the Phillies more successful moving forward? It will certainly be fascinating to see. But first order of business, of course, is what to do with JT Realmuto. Everybody thinks that the Phillies' chances of bringing back JT have drastically increased with the addition of Dombrowski, who once again has never been shy to throw around some cash to, big league level talent, big time talent, MVP, all-star type talent in Realmuto. So again, with James McCann going to the New York Mets, which we'll discuss later in segment 3 here when we talk about the Mets in detail, but that increases the chances of the Phillies. Dombrowski increases the chances of the Phillies. So it's basically down to the Phillies, the Nationals, and a few mystery teams out there, maybe the Rangers possibly having conversations, but that will certainly be the first order of business for Dombrowski, is finalizing his market based on where McCann set the market, the years, and what they're looking to communicate there. So next order is we're hearing rumors about a possible Vince Velasquez trade. Vince was recently tendered a contract during the arbitration back and forth within the past couple of weeks. People in Philadelphia thought he could be gone, but ultimately he was brought back, and I think this is the end goal. I think they're trying to move him. He's due anywhere between $3.8 and $4.8 million, so that's a good contract for a guy throwing mid-90s, and anybody out there can look at that and see the potential. So I don't know what they would get back for Velasquez, but Dombrowski likes to wheel and deal. He likes to move the prospects. I do believe we're going to see some changes here in Philadelphia based on their roster, because ultimately I'm just not sure the direction of this team. And this is me as a fan speaking here who watches every day, but everybody knows about the bullpen. Everybody's turned over basically the entire bullpen. They're looking for top-end bullpen help out there. Liam Hendricks, Colomb, you name it, they're in on it based on the reporting from the MLB insiders. But beyond that, I just think offensively, the Phillies really need to find what their identity is. Are they a strikeout home run team? Are they a small ball team? Are they new school? Are they old school? Kind of what ultimate direction are they trying to go here? And I think that will help them with the drafting process, because the Phillies are the only team really to kind of screw up this whole rebuild process. I mean, the San Diego Padres, they're up and coming now based on drafts and offsetting that with veteran additions. The Chicago White Sox have now entered that mold. They've drafted well. Now they're adding veteran additions. Lance Lynn, Lucas Giolito, Dallas Keuchel, all of these guys coming together. And the Phillies, they don't have any of these young prospects. I mean, Spencer Howard's up there. Alec Bohm are really the top two and that are close to ready. But the next level or wave of talent, because they've missed on so many draft picks, is at the lower level of the farm system, and certainly not going to be part of the cavalry that shows up in 2021. So, but Dombrowski, not a rebuild, more of a retool, and yet the minor league system seems like a rebuild. The major league product seems like a retool, which certainly makes this a challenging opportunity here. But big market team, they have money to spend, they have the TV contracts, they have the ability to hopefully be competitive here in the near future. But Dombrowski certainly has his hands full on getting the Phillies back to prominence. But that'll do it here for the first segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. What we'll do now is we'll pause, step aside for a word from one of our sponsors. They help us pay the bills around here. And also a word from one of our sister shows that you guys should be checking out. But when we come back on the other side, we're going to talk about the Rule 5 draft. This went down over the past week. 18 picks were made. I'm going to tell you guys about them, and we'll find out if anybody's going to contribute here in 2021. So stick around, everyone. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll be right back.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Appreciate you guys listening in. If you haven't done so yet, do me a favor, hit that like button, rate and review the podcast, click subscribe. It all changes depending on which platform you're on, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Pandora, wherever the podcast is that you guys are listening, because the more and more platforms become available, the more and more different ways you guys can consume the great quality product here within the GSMC Podcast Network. But please hit that 5-star review, write us a comment, subscribe, share us with your friends. That certainly goes a long way for continuing to allow us to grow and bring quality content to everybody out there. But here we are for our second segment of the Baseball Podcast, where we're going to be talking about the Rule 5 draft and what exactly took place here over the past couple of days, or I believe it was Sunday. Ultimately, this went down, or Friday night. I can't remember all the days with the holiday season running together here. I'm just glad to be talking to you guys. But 18 players were taken during the Major League phase. This was the same amount as 2016 and 2017. This was a very high number because people thought things could be quiet with the pandemic, with the financial stress that the teams are currently under. They thought that this year could be relatively slow. Well, it was quite the opposite. It was very, very active. And there's also a major league level portion and a minor league level portion to the Rule 5 draft. And everybody really only discusses the major league level, but there were over 70 players taken throughout the entire process, which once again was a high for about the last 8 years or so. So a lot of guys making moves, a lot of guys now property of new teams, and we're going to discuss the 18 people that were moved here at the major league level. 15 of them were right-handed pitchers, whether it was starter or reliever. A lot of right-handed pitchers on the move. There were 2 outfielders and 1 shortstop ultimately drafted throughout the process. But how does it work exactly? Well, teams pay $100,000 per selection to the player's old team, and then the new team must keep that player on the 25-man roster for the duration of the season. If the team at any point, whether it's spring training, the month of September, whenever it is, decides against keeping that player on the active roster, then they must be sent through waivers. If they're unclaimed, then they're offered back to their old team for $50,000. And typically, the old team takes them back, gives 50 of the 100,000 they received, and is $50,000 richer, and no worse for wear, essentially going on there. So, because a lot of times they won't be claimed on waivers, because if they're not good enough to make your team, they're typically not good enough to really make any team at the big league level, because this is where the surprise out of 18 players really came about. Because if you think about it, it's typically teams at the bottom of the league that take these types of chances. Because these players, a lot of them haven't played above AA or AAA, have basically shown that they're not ready to contribute at the major league level. And if they were, they would be on the roster of the team that currently owns them or currently has their contract. So a lot of the lesser teams bring them over because, yeah, that's a good team. We're not. We think you could make our team, and that's typically what happens. So are there any success stories out of Rule 5 draft picks? And yes, but a lot of them end up going to the new squad for a month, 2 months into the season. Maybe they get a couple of guys back healthy and they just wanted to look at this person, ultimately, so they send them back. But more so than not, these do not work out. But there have been the circumstances where not only have Rule 5 draft picks gone on to make the team for the entirety of the season, but ultimately go on to have successful careers, because notable Rule 5 selections who have made an all-star team then throughout their career. Breaking it down here, position player and pitcher style of things. On the position player side, you have Jose Bautista, George Bell, Bobby Bonilla, Darrell Evans, Josh Hamilton, Dan Uggla, Fernando Vina, and Shane Victorino. And reading those names in my head, I'm going, yeah, I know every one of these names. So, at one point, these guys were stuck in the minor leagues for 5+ seasons, unable to, break into the big league club with their current organization. So they got a second chance. They took advantage of it and ultimately had successful careers. On the pitching side of things, Jason Grilli, Willie Hernandez, Mike Morgan, Jeff Nelson, Darren O'Day, Johan Santana, Joakim Soria, and Ryan Presley have all made the All-Star game after being selected in the Rule 5 draft. So it can be basically a lottery pick. You're paying $100,000 for potentially a lottery pick, giving this guy a shot. Maybe he's been buried behind a few other top prospects, because this is where the 40-man purge that takes place. Because if your own organization thinks highly of you enough, or your timeline is quick enough, they add you to the 40-man roster. They know this years in advance when players are going to be Rule 5 eligible, and they plan roster construction in order not to lose a ton of prospects. So if you're on this list, your team knows, hey, you either drafted high, have high potential, but things just haven't worked out to this point to where we're going to protect this other person instead of yourself. So let's get into some of these picks. Let's break down who's going where. Ultimately, like I said, 18 selections. So a busy evening the other day. But the Pirates had the first pick. They took Jose Soriano, a right-handed pitcher from the Angels. Soriano underwent Tommy John surgery last February. He missed a season, and his elbow scar, it's touchy. So, but the Pirates ultimately, they think it could be a positive thing. He misses more time. He continues to rehab, get the rest of his body healthy, and he could come back, better than he ever was before moving on. So Soriano to the Pirates was the top pick in the Rule 5 draft this year. Next, we have the Rangers. And ultimately, before I get into the Rangers pick, because I'm going to butcher his name, I do have to say, some of these names in this Rule 5 draft, top-notch. So shout out to these guys. Shout out to the parents, everybody involved. These names are pretty solid here at the top of the list. So I know I'm going to butcher some of these guys, but forgive me since, they're obviously former minor leaguers, and I don't know the entire roster. But the Rangers, they took Brett DeJeus, Geus, from the Dodgers. The Dodgers ultimately lost 2 prospects to the Rule 5 draft. They were the only team to lose more than 1, so people taking advantage of the Dodgers organization and the depth that they have out there in L.A. But Brett DeJeus, right-handed pitcher, of course. He's an interesting relief prospect. His velocity went up when he moved to the bullpen. but he struggled with command and ultimately hasn't looked the part. So it'll be interesting to see if the Rangers can get anything out of that, or if he'll just be a camp arm for them down there. But third overall, the Tigers took Akil Baddoo, an outfielder from the Twins. Baddoo was the Twins' second-round pick in the 2016 draft. Of course, he's behind a pretty good outfield there in Minnesota. So I certainly see why he hasn't been able to, crack the lineup. He's also had Tommy John throughout his professional career. So good strength, good speed, but ultimately I think the pitching's going to be too much, and he will not make the Tigers, even though, the opportunity will be there. So the Red Sox took Garrett Whitlock from the Yankees. Whitlock had Tommy John in July of 2019. So he'll be coming off about 18 months when they head into 2021. He's had success at the Double-A level. So, relief pitcher, fastball, slider combination. The Red Sox are hoping if they could develop a changeup, maybe they can move him into the rotation, and he could be a piece there for the future. The Orioles then took Mac Scherzer at number 5 from the Cincinnati Reds. Scherzer's uncle was also a big league pitcher for the Baltimore Orioles. So the kid here, he's got a big frame, loose arm. He's had success in high A, but certainly hasn't pitched above that. So nobody really knows if he will be able to stick around here in Baltimore. But the Diamondbacks at number 6, they took Zach Pop from the Orioles. Pop is another member to undergo Tommy John. A lot of Tommy John in these guys. This is because that forces them to miss 1, maybe 2 seasons. And throughout that time, you're not going to elevate them up the chain, single A to double A. So they then become behind the 8 ball and behind their actual process, which allows them to be in double A in year 5, because really they've only played for 3 years and they sent 2 of them out with injuries. So Pop has 22 career appearances at double A. So, he's had success there. Potentially, if he stays healthy, he could make a run for the Diamondbacks. The Rockies at number 7, Jordan Sheffield, a right-handed pitcher from the Dodgers. So Sheffield's got great stuff. It's really just about command, durability. He's been in and out of the lineup, walks a ton of guys when he was at Double-A. So the odds are against him figuring it out if he can't find himself consistently in the strike zone. At number 8, the Angels took Jose Alberto Rivera. Let's see, from the Astros. He's one of the most interesting arms here in this class. He's been used long inning, short inning, reliever, starter, all over the place. His fastball touches 100. He's got a splitter that people think can work off of it. So the Angels looking for help in the relief side of things in their bullpen. They're going to take a ticket at Rivera from Houston. At number 9, the Mets, they took Luis Oviedo, a right-handed pitcher from Cleveland. He was not picked in last year's draft, even though he was eligible last year. So had a good 2020, or didn't participate because of the pandemic, but continued to develop workouts, videos, things like that. He finds himself taken at number 9 here in 2020. But at 10, the Mariners took Will Vest, a right-handed pitcher from the Tigers. He can basically a short right-hander, deceptive delivery, a riding fastball. He appeared in 3 different levels in 2019, was in the Arizona Fall League. So he's faced some good competition, and the Mariners, a little bit short-staffed, they think he has a good chance to make the opening day lineup and potentially throw some innings out there for Seattle. Number 11 is Kyle Holder. The Philadelphia Phillies took him from the Yankees. Holder was the 30th pick in the 2015 draft, but really hasn't hit to the point of where he was able to climb the ladder. He's great quality fielder, so the hitting, though, suggests that he's basically a backup at the major league level. And the Phillies, with some question marks around the shortstop position, second base, third base, Gene Segura on the block, Didi Gregorius, a free agent. Is Scott Kingery the guy? I certainly understand why the depth at the shortstop spot was the reason the Phillies went there in the Rule A draft. At number 12, the Giants took Dedniel Nunez, a right-handed pitcher from the Mets. Nunez missed the second half of the 2019 season due to a shoulder injury. Of course, did not participate in 2020, but he's got a high spin rate on his fastball. His off-speed particularly, leaves much to be desired. But if you can ride that fastball up in the zone and work some sort of off-speed off of it, you can have success here at the big league level, because that's how you offset kind of the increase in the degree of the swing plane through the zone. You offset that with elevated fastballs and reduce that contact surface time through the zone to be effective. So at number 13, the Marlins took Paul Campbell from the Tampa Bay Rays. Campbell was a back-end starting prospect due to multiple pitches in his arsenal, but his strikeouts have never really shown what some of his analytics or sabermetrics show. And when it comes to spin rate, he's up there on the list, but his performance and results really haven't shown to that level. So he's dealt with some arm injuries, some forearm issues, injuries. Could be an issue for him moving forward, but certainly has the opportunity to stick around in the bigs. You have the Chicago Cubs at 14 taking Gray Fenter, a right-handed pitcher from the Orioles. Fenter, he's a small guy, right-hander, above average fastball, breaking ball, but he's never been above Class A. So he walks a little bit too many people, hasn't shown the command in the zone, but the stuff is there. So if the Cubbies, if they see something in spring training or in camp, they could potentially get him a back-end starter out of this pick here. So Cleveland at 15 took Trevor Stephan, a right-handed pitcher from the Yankees. Stefan's the one pitcher who could probably benefit from a new organization. Cleveland's going to move him to the bullpen from the starting rotation, but high-spin fastball, sweeping slider, they think that two picks mix is going to be able to make him effective. Number 16, the Athletics took Kai Tom, an outfielder from Cleveland. Tom has done well as a professional. In 2019, he hit .290 between AA and AAA, but short, small guy, only 5'9", kind of Jose Altuve-ish. Let's see if Oakland gives him a shot to see if he can hit at the big league level. And the last two picks here, number 17, the Orioles. They took Tyler Wells from the Minnesota Twins organization. He as well had Tommy John surgery, hasn't pitched in a regular season game since 2018. This kind of gets back to my point of missing 2 years. So, of course, he's down on the Twins ladder of prospects, but 6'8", big kid, three-quarter arm slot, nice little bit of run. The Orioles, I would be excited to see somebody with that stature as well. At number 18, you have the Athletics. Danny Jimenez, a right-handed pitcher from the Blue Jays. Jimenez was selected last year in the Rule 5 draft by the Giants, but ultimately was sent back to the Blue Jays. So he is now available again, and the Athletics say, hey, maybe try it out this time with us, and we'll see if you can make the squad. But certainly an active Rule 5 draft like we talked about. 18 picks being made, 70 total over the minor league portion. It was kind of fascinating to watch the wheeling and dealing going on during the winter meetings in the Rule 5 draft. But that'll do it here for segment number 2 of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll step aside for a minute, and then we'll come back and discuss the New York Mets. They hired a GM. They made some signings. What's going on in New York? Stick around. Find out.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Thanks again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. It is Monday, December 14th, 11 days till the big guy shows up. So hopefully you guys are getting your holiday shopping out of the way, getting your wrapping taken care of next. That's next on my list. That's one thing I'm not looking forward to, although I do appreciate the new wrapping paper with the squares on the back. It works better for guys like me who can basically just count squares, measure things out, cut along those lines, and you're good to go. Because if you're giving me a blank side to the wrapping paper, you're certainly going to get something that does not look as pretty as if you're going to help me out there on the backside. So hopefully you guys enjoying yourselves, staying safe, staying healthy out there. Things are certainly crazy here in Pennsylvania. We're entering another 3-week lockdown. No more indoor dining. Gyms, saloons, salons, whatever you want to call them out there, they're shut down too. So it's certainly getting crazy. But stay safe during the holidays. Enjoy yourself. And thanks again for listening here. But we're jumping back into our NL East conversation. We're going to talk about the New York Mets. They've been in the headlines over the past couple of days. They had a frantic weekend. They hired a general manager. His name is Jared Porter. He is currently the assistant general manager of the Diamondbacks, will now be taking over GM responsibilities in New York. And they also signed catcher James McCann to a 4-year deal. So my question is, which order did those come in, and who signed whom, essentially? So we'll start out with Jared Porter, and then we'll get into kind of the player roster side of things in New York. But who is Jared Porter? Well, he's got a very impressive background. He was with the Red Sox from 2004 all the way up to 2015. He started there under Theo Epstein. He started out as an intern, but then continued to work his way up the organization. He became player development assistant, then the coordinator of professional scouting, then assistant director of professional scouting, and ultimately the director of professional scouting in Boston. So he was there during 3 World Series victories, 2004, 2007, 2013, all within the scouting portion side of things. Then in 2016, he reunited with Theo Epstein in Chicago. The Cubs hired him to be their director of professional scouting and special assistant moving forward. So Porter was there in 2016 when Chicago broke the curse. So he has 4 World Series to his resume. And he's been in Arizona from 2017 until, of course, he was named Mets general manager. So he joined the Diamondbacks as senior vice president and assistant general manager in 2017. He was rumored to be a candidate the past couple of years for a bunch of different GM roles, and ultimately, now has a new challenge of taking over a large market team in New York, coming from a smaller market atmosphere in Arizona, because Porter's been known to talk about combining scouting and analytics. This seems to be the new age conversation. I talked to you guys about how Dave Dombrowski mentioned something very similar during his initial press conference. So I'm sure Porter will talk about, hey, scouts matter, analytics matter. It's about a marriage between the two and not going ultimately one way or the other and finding that long-term success. So it'll be interesting to see ultimately how he pans out there in New York, because, of course, his background is in scouting, is in player development, doesn't have a ton of success ultimately when it comes to the contract side of things, and those are 2 totally different worlds. So, Dombrowski, very good at one, struggles at the other. It'll be interesting to see how Jared Porter, comes across when it comes to contract negotiations and ultimately making deals. And I think we're going to find out sooner than later, because, like I mentioned, James McCann was signed to a 4-year, $40 million deal. And this one came out hours before Jared Porter was reported to be or named general manager of the team. So I'm sure behind the scenes, Jared Porter was informed or involved in some of the conversation around whether or not they should sign James McCann, because I don't believe you sign a player to a 4-year contract hours prior to offering a general manager title to a candidate and not letting them know, hey, I'm hiring you a new employee, spending some of your money, and here's your offer we talked about. So you would think that, hey, we're thinking about doing this, we're discussing this, what's your vision, what's your goal, and then ultimately we'll figure out the details such as your salary, your title, when it comes to further conversation. But McCann was added 4 years. He's only 30 years old. Of course, coming off an $18.3 million contract, a record for a catcher for a season. He hit 289, 15 RBIs in the 31 games that he played. Of course, the season was shortened and he didn't get all that money, but you guys get it out there. So he was an all-star in 2018, career high average in 2019, seems to be coming into his prime at the age of 30, but catchers, when they get on that other side, they decline rather quickly. So it will be fascinating to see if he can continue his ascending trajectory or if ultimately he will kind of get over that hill quickly and this contract could look like a mistake. So very similar conversation with JT Realmuto, very similar timelines. I do like the 4-year deal for somebody at 30, 31 years old. I know Realmuto wants 5, 6, 7, and I do think this is part of the holdup when it comes to his recruitment. But McCann, he was a consensus second-best catcher out there on the free agency market. Let's see here. For his career, he's thrown out 36.3% of base stealers, or not for his career, since 2015, excuse me. So for the last 5 years, he's thrown out 36.3, and JT Realmuto is at 36.0. So those two, right at the top of the list, they're ranked 3rd and 4th. Martin Maldonado and Salvador Perez at 37.7 and 36.9. So those guys obviously in the top 3 percentile when it comes to defense and throwing out base runners. It's just a matter of the offense. And if for the Mets, McCann can continue to deliver, that should be a good signing at about $10 million a year. So if that wasn't Porter's first move, whether it was or it wasn't, I'm sure he's going to talk about how he was informed by the team. He agreed with the move. He's looking forward to it during his initial press conference. But he's got a lot on the to-do list. And the Phillies with Dombrowski, the to-do list wasn't so great. It's maybe a trade of a number 5 starter. Are we going to move an older shortstop? What's going on? But in New York, these are prime time moves that need or could be made. Because, of course, with the James McCann addition, people are assuming that thinks, they're going to go for Trevor Bauer, George Springer, or even maybe Francisco Lindor. Because all reports are that they're looking at 2 big fish in the market, and James McCann was not one of those big fish. So you can remove JT Realmuto from that conversation, and it becomes a bit clearer ultimately what they're trying to do. So it's been reported they're in on George Springer, and I think Springer would be the next domino to fall in New York. After Springer, their attention would then go to Trevor Bauer. If they can't work out a deal based on the numbers there, maybe they go to the bullpen, Liam Hendricks potentially, or second-tier starters, Jake Odorizzi style of things. But that's going to be number 1 on the to-do list, is figuring out ultimately which direction we're going this offseason and how heavily we're going to dive into that direction. Because internally, there's a couple of questions to be answered as well. So Michael Conforto, who's had himself a good couple of years, it's been talked about that his agent, Scott Boras, they want to get through 2021 and test the market. Well, Mets fans don't want it to get there. They want to sign Conforto to an extension. He's 27 years old, in his prime, so they think that is something that this offseason, at least the conversation, should be taking place between Conforto and the Mets, because if he hits the market, they think somebody's ultimately going to overpay for his services. Noah Syndergaard is also somebody who's up for a contract extension. This one's a little bit tricky because, of course, Tommy John surgery recently taking place with Syndergaard. Is he going to be back in 2021? Is he going to be dominant, or does he take things a little bit slow? Does he sit out 2021, enter free agency, healthy, coming off of Tommy John? Does he go the route of throwing bullpens in the offseason to prove to guys that he still has the stuff and he's willing to come back? Or does he try to rush it and push it to come back in 2021, get some tape on the books, get some stats back, and be able to carry that over into a contract into 2022. So Syndergaard, though, if he comes back right where he was, he's a legit number 2 At best, a number 1. At worst, a number 3. So a top 1, 2, or 3 pitcher on the market, he's going to get scooped up with arm problems or not. And that's where Met fans are looking to possibly extend Syndergaard before he becomes expensive or they lose him as well. Because they lost Wheeler to free agency. They don't want to lose Syndergaard in a similar style. So, of course, in New York, you got to figure out what's going on with the coaching staff. There's a lot to be determined down there. A few other front office positions could be filled, assistant general manager, a few other executives, or a key title that's usually thrown around in New York. But everybody's excited because owner Steve Cohen, he's aggressive. Sandy Anderson is known to be aggressive, and people believe that Jared Porter is going to come in and be able to work with both of those individuals on a positive level. I mean, Twitter reactions amongst the industry are very happy and very positive for Jared Porter, and people think that he's going to do a nice job there in New York. So now that they have a general manager, does the money come soon after? Are we going to get a George Springer sighting, Trevor Bauer, Francisco Lindor? What's the move in New York now that James McCann is in the fold as well as Jared Porter? It'll certainly be fascinating to see which direction they're going there. So they've added Trevor May, added McCann. They're off to a nice start this offseason in New York with certainly the biggest fish left out there to potentially be caught. But that'll do it for our Mets conversation. I now want to talk to you guys about some other signings that have taken place. We talked about James McCann. He was the big one over the past couple of days, but there were a few under-the-radar signings and transactions ultimately that took place. One of them being with the Seattle Mariners. Right-handed pitcher Chris Flexen signed a major league level deal to return to the Mariners. He was recently in the KBO in 2020. So he had a 3.01 ERA in 116 innings in the KBO, and he will be coming back to pitch with the Seattle Mariners in 2020, getting a second chance league side. The Texas Rangers, they made a trade with the Tampa Bay Rays. They acquired first baseman Nate Lowe in a 6-player deal. They're also getting, first baseman Jake Gunther, and a player to be named later will be their 3. The Rays are receiving catcher-outfielder Gilberto Hernandez, infielder Oslavia Basabe, and outfielder Alexander Ovales to Tampa Bay. So a lot of lower-level prospects going back and forth. The big name there, Nate Lowe, going from Tampa Bay over to Texas in a deal. A few other trades were finalized. The Reds finalized the Raisel Iglesias trade. They're getting Leonardo Rivas from the Angels as the player to be named later. Rivas is 23, and he's never played above high A, so certainly a lottery ticket there for the Reds. The Brewers and Dodgers completed the Corey Nebel trade. Leo Crawford went from the Dodgers to complete the trade. Crawford's 23. He had a strong 2019 between single A and double A, a 2.81 ERA. So a nice get there for the Brewers. Let's see here. There were a few other... the Rangers added reliever Edubray Ramos on a minor league level deal with a major league level option. He had been with the Phillies for years out of the bullpens, got a nice off-speed slider that is really devastating when it's in the zone, but he just hasn't been able to find consistency off of his fastball to go along with it. The Rangers signed David Dahl, so the Rangers were busy. They traded for Nate Lowe. They also signed David Dahl. Dahl, of course, was non-tendered by the Rockies last week, only 26 years old, the former first-round pick. He was an all-star in 2019, so the Rangers, a very inexpensive one-year, $3 million deal for Dahl to head back to Texas. Let's see, a couple more here. The Mets, of course, McCann. But lastly, the Dodgers added veteran depth on minor league deals. Brandon Morrow, Jimmy Nelson, Brock Stewart, and James Pazos all added to the Dodgers on minor league level deals to round out their roster out there in L.A. So not a ton of action happening at the high levels when it comes to signings or transactions across Major League Baseball. Of course, the winter meetings being all virtual may have helped with the slowdown here over the past 72 hours, but the Rule 5 draft was busy. The Phillies now have a general manager and can find themselves making some moves. The Mets now have a general manager, can start making some moves because those two teams in those big markets are heavy hitters and a lot of times set the market for these lower-level teams trying to come in for these relief pitchers. So are the Phillies going after Hendricks? Are the Mets? And they can kind of set the market from there on down. But that'll do it here for segment number 3 of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. I do appreciate you guys listening in. We'll step aside one last time here for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows. But when we come back, I'm going to update you guys what's going on in minor league baseball. Not major league, minor league baseball out there. There has been an update across MLB, the relationship, what's going on. So we'll update you there, and then we'll talk about all the rumors, news, and notes currently taking place. So stick around, everyone. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll be right back.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Appreciate you guys tuning in today. If you haven't checked out the other shows within the podcast network, do yourself a favor. Type in GSMC right there into the search icon. You'll get a plethora of different shows. It's like 20 to 30. Whatever topic you're interested in, whether it's sports, the NBA, NHL, fantasy football, the playoffs are coming up here, or it's books, politics, news, music, movies, whatever it is, whatever you're into, we got a fantastic show for you guys within the podcast network. So this is the fourth and final segment here on December 14th. Hopefully you guys are having a great time thus far. Appreciate you tuning in here today. But wanted to give you an update on minor league baseball. Within the past week, there has been some new reports, new traction, a lot of new stuff going on, and basically wanted to share that intel with you guys if you didn't see the report or what's ultimately currently taking place. Because last time I talked to you guys about it, I can't remember. I think maybe a month ago now at this point, but nobody really knew the direction. Everybody knew kind of the overall structure, but it really was kind of a wait and see or a holding pattern to try to determine next steps. And the step that recently took place was that 119 teams received their quote-unquote invitations for the 2021 season. And this invitation means to be an affiliated member of Major League Baseball, because the options that are being discussed are either Major League Baseball or a wooden bat summer league or an independent professional league. They're trying to come up with different options to make sure, nobody completely collapses or causes kind of economic downturn, because some of these ballparks are in smaller towns, smaller cities. They employ a lot of individuals. They bring in a lot of touristy people from out of town, things like that. So they're trying not to totally decimate anyone, but out of that, there have been 119, not 120, because there's one that we'll talk about, but 119 have received quote-unquote invitations. And the one that we're leaving out, because 120 were sent out, this one is a bit tricky because apparently this one was with Fresno. There is currently a AAA team in Fresno that was basically invited but told moving forward that they will be a low A affiliate now. So going from AAA caliber stadium, seating, sizing, operations down to a low A level is something that they're working through, because there's conversation that, Fresno needs to look at the economics, try to understand, could they potentially make more money as a wood bat operator, because there are some teams that, based on where they're at, whether they're moving up or down, the franchise evaluation will not be as high as it was. So will they be able to kind of turn and go into the college level type of programming? Does this still bring in enough revenue? Is it a high quality baseball? Is it good enough to bring in fans to the stands? So a lot of this has to be discussed, but Fresno is currently not happy going from AAA down to a low A affiliate, but this is where they're at. So if they say no, ultimately move on, this could also be taking place across the 119. They've essentially been made aware, hey, this is the offer you have. Let me know if you want to accept. There haven't been any specific paperwork sent out or any contracts or details because there is some early word coming back, like Wilmington here in Delaware, close to us in the greater Philadelphia area. Apparently, they've come out and said yes. We don't even care what the contract says. We would love to be associated and affiliated. We are in, because I currently believe that they are independent baseball. So now they will receive an affiliation, which of course will increase their business evaluation of things. Because what does an affiliation mean? Basically, hey, you're associated with Major League Baseball, but that increases the revenue. It increases the franchise evaluation, what it's worth. But also all of the salaries are then paid by the Major League level team and not by your own internal operation. So the salaries of the players and the salaries of the coaches, of course, which are your biggest expenses when it comes to any professional team, those will be paid by the Phillies, the Mets, whoever it is, as opposed to if Fresno now goes independent, Fresno has to figure out how to pay those players' salaries and bring them in and ultimately have them perform. So it'll be fascinating to see where that yes or no stands. Could there be other teams potentially? And if a team says no, like a Fresno, MLB already has a backup plan in place to kind of offset or next time, basically a waiting list, so to speak. And one team we're hearing on that waiting list is a team, again, local here to the Northeast, but is Trenton, New Jersey. Trenton was not chosen again by their parent-affiliated team, but based on their location, geography-wise, the amount of professional teams on the East Coast, certainly it feels like if somebody were to say no, Trenton could slide right in there and take their place. So the initial invitations have been sent out to 119, 120, including Fresno, but that was the biggest one that's seen the most amount of kickback here early on. But from the business side of the minor league team, there's also been memos, mandates, conversations around how estimated travel expenses could increase $100,000 to $150,000 for the 2021 season. This would be due to having to get more rooms on the road because guys can't share rooms. It's due to having to get more buses because you can only have a certain number of people on a bus. This goes into facilities and, all the travel that's involved with buses, airplanes, as well as baseball is going to have a stipulation. If it's over a certain mile marker, you then have to fly. And some of these lower level operations were driving 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours and kind of doing their routine. Well, this could be labeled too far, and for player safety, they now have to fly. And these are all new expenses that you did not have previously. It is understood that the majority, at least 100, 105, 110, maybe even 115 of the 120 who have received invites will accept their invitation because it's been communicated from Major League Baseball that they essentially went to every team, every organization, and gave them first dibs at retaining their affiliates currently. So they went to the Phillies. I just keep using them because I know their minor league system the best here, but their AAA team is now in the Lehigh Valley, which is an hour and a half from Philadelphia. The AA team is in Reading, which is an hour and a half from Philadelphia. Then you have the Florida League team, of course, down there, but you have a middle-tier team, single A ball in New Jersey. Everything is very close to Philadelphia, and this is ideally what Major League Baseball wanted for the rest of its teams, because you had teams like the New York Mets or the Minnesota Twins that the Mets AAA team is in Las Vegas, Nevada, or the Twins AAA team is in Rochester, New York. And up in Toronto, they got a team in Western Canada that they can utilize. And what was happening that people weren't realizing, if they were paying attention in depth, was that some of these teams would not promote players to this level due to the ability logistically to have the option to pull them up to the bigs. So the Mets would keep people in Double-A because that was closer to Queens than Triple-A. And if they work their bullpen over the weekend against the Nationals and they have to call somebody up, well, somebody can get here from a couple of hours instead of across the country, so we'll just pull guys up from Double-A. So it kind of manipulated the tiered system of the minor leagues and didn't put the best competition ultimately where they could be, just due to, geography, right? So it's something that always fascinated me, like the Nationals. They have Harrisburg a couple of hours. But there are teams with cross-country trips, multiple-hour time zones. I mean, I told the story on here with Ryan Presley, a buddy of mine who got called up at midnight one night. He was in Lehigh Valley, an hour from my place. And he's like, hey, man, I got called up to the show. I got to be in Kansas City tomorrow. So I got up early out of bed, 6 a.m., picked him up, drove him to the airport. He hopped in an airplane, flew to Kansas City, went right to the ballpark, and ended up throwing in the game that night. So the guy woke up in Allentown, Pennsylvania at 5 a.m., was throwing in the big leagues in Kansas City about 10, 12, 14 hours later. So it was just fascinating to kind of follow that and ultimately see this is what the people are going through. But I myself just tuning in at 7:30, seeing this Presley guy give up a home run, and I'm going, man, this guy stinks. What's he doing here? Not realizing he's traveled, woke up early, gone through all of this uncomfortable logistics side of things to get here, as opposed to, a car ride for an hour and a half, and boom, you're good to go. So I do implore the geography side of things and how that should be set up and where they should move going forward. Of course, you have the human side of things. There's going to be less number of affiliated teams, which means less number of professional players, less number of workers at those stadiums, and all the way down to the ground floor. It certainly isn't something you want to see. But, baseball, they've come out. This isn't new. It's just a new step to ultimately finding the final product now that Major League Baseball is going to kind of overtake the minor league system in its entirety here. So 120 teams get invitations. The next couple of months will be yes, no's, and then ultimately filling in those teams and finding out who they're going to be affiliated to, where the geography is going to be, and ultimately things should come to a rest here hopefully soon, and they'll figure things out to try to put together 2021 season with the vaccine now being released. People don't know, Operation Light Speed or whatever, Warp Speed I think it is. So my Star Wars coming out, Light Speed, Star Trek, whatever it is. It's a lot of fun here. But let's wrap up the last couple of minutes here talking about the latest rumors, news, notes going on across Major League Baseball. It seems like every day we get a little bit of something, but never that huge bites to talk about, such as a top free agent ultimately signing somewhere. But what's going on? What's the latest we're hearing? That the LA Angels are basically going to be involved in the entire pitching market. There's rumors that they're going to be talking to Trevor Bauer. There's rumors they're going to be discussing Blake Snell. Maniason out there is wheeling and dealing. Justin Upton, he's looking to be moved here. So, the Astros are reluctant to overpay second-level starters and really want to go for the top-end guys here. So we could see the Angels continue to be active, and it could be them versus the Mets for a couple of top arms on the market. So Corey Kluber, he's going to throw on a mound for a couple of teams here in the next couple of days. Let's see, by the end of December, he was a 2-time Cy Young winner. Of course, he was shut down this year after 1 inning, and he didn't throw in 2019, so hasn't logged a full season since 2018. But the Red Sox, the Twins are a couple of teams that have been pointed out. But let's see. Kluber's going to be throwing a bullpen here in the next couple of weeks and see if that leads to a signing moving forward. The Tampa Bay Rays, it's being said that they are mulling a Chris Archer reunion. Of course, they traded Archer to the Pirates years back for a couple of different prospects, including Meadows and Glasnow. Those guys have panned out in Tampa Bay, but Archer finds himself out there on the market. He's 32. He sat out 2020, recovering from a surgery, coronavirus concern. So he could be looking for a 1-year deal, try to bet on himself, and ultimately parlay that into a higher level paying contract over the next couple of years. And the Tampa Bay Rays seem to be interested potentially. We also have Nolan Arenado. Updated conversation. People are talking about how between Arenado, he may have to choose between the money and contention. A lot of people are saying if he opts out of his current high-level deal, he'll be looking at a deal similar to that of like a Troy Tulowitzki, probably more in that 4-year, 5-year deal, and won't be the high end of what he's currently getting. So he can either stay in Colorado, make his money, or potentially opt out, go to a contender, and make a little bit less from his side of things. But the Red Sox, they have interest in quite a few starting pitchers. We talked about them being interested in Kluber. Well, it's also come out that they are interested in Rich Hill, as well as Jake Odorizzi. Of course, Chris Sale is expected to return. Eduardo Rodriguez. Nobody really knows with coronavirus what's going on there, so they have a couple of openings to add to the rotation. And Hill or Odorizzi and Kluber are certainly guys who I think would benefit Boston next year. The Washington Nationals are interested in Kyle Schwarber. Schwarber's name has been out there since he was non-tendered, like David Dahl, who recently signed, Eddie Rosario now on the list. So Schwarber's the next guy who could potentially get plucked up. Nationals manager David Martinez, he was with the Cubs while Schwarber was there, so there's a connection there that could potentially bring him into the fold in Washington moving forward. But that'll do it here for today's episode. There's a few other rumors, but none of them high level enough to continue discussing with you guys. We'll just wrap up today's episode here at just over an hour. Once again, thanks for tuning in. Please hit that like button, rate and review the podcast, click subscribe, give us a comment, do all that good stuff that helps us continue to grow here. So tell about us to one of your friends. You know, if you guys enjoyed the show, send a text, help us spread the word. I certainly appreciate it. But that'll do it for me here today. I know we have a new episode coming out every day. I'll see you guys again this upcoming Thursday. Hopefully you enjoy the week out there. Stay safe, everyone, and I'll talk to you then.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.